What's going on, everybody? Welcome. You're watching or listening to Whistlekick Martial Arts Radio, episode 840. My guest today, Sensei Lawrence Kane. There's a name some of you know. If you don't, by the end you will. I'm Jeremy Lesniak. I'm your host here for the show. I founded Whistlekick because I love traditional martial arts, and I believe traditional martial arts makes all of us better versions of ourselves, which is why I want to see everybody in the world train for 6 months. It's a lofty goal. Thank you for being part of it. You're along for the ride as we connect, educate, and entertain here at Whistlekick. Go to whistlekick.com. Check out all the things that we're doing, from the various projects to the products. Save 15% in the store with the code podcast15, and go deeper on this show at whistlekickmartialartsradio.com. Now, if you don't know today's guest, there's a good chance you are at least familiar with one of the, how many did you say, 27, 28 books that he has written. It's a lot of books. He also holds the distinction of partnering with past guest Kris Wilder on a number of things. We talk about Kris, we talk about these books, we talk about how he got involved in martial arts, we talk about all the stuff that you would imagine. And it's a great conversation. I think you're going to like it. So here we go. Hey, Lawrence, thanks for being here.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
I got to ask, what's on your mug?
Oh, this is this is a
little hardcore.
Yeah, it's a mythosaur skull. It's a ode to Boba Fett from Star Wars.
Oh, right on.
Okay. Many years ago.
You know, If you know your Star Wars history, which I know, a tiny little bit, we've had people on who have totally schooled me. But there's so much about Star Wars that's rooted in martial traditions.
Oh, yeah.
And then watching the more modern iterations, I think it's even easier to find some of those martial arts elements in there, let alone, the really cool stunt folks that are on that, we've been fortunate to have some connection with some of them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of that came from the Kurosawa films of
Right.
back in the day, and kind of the Lone Samurai and that sort of stuff is, I mean, let's face it, lightsabers are cool. I mean,
lightsabers are cool.
And if they were real, I think you'd find a lot of martial artists would, cut off an arm or a leg by accident trying to learn how to use one.
Imagine if we extended that technology to other weapons, like nunchaku. How many of us have taken one to the back of the head, right? I mean,
I've had 7 concussions that I know about. I used to say 6, and then my sister reminded me the 7th one, which was we went down to Chinatown, and unbeknownst to my folks, I bought a pair of octagon nunchaku with the chain, like the really cool looking ones. First time I used it, I do not remember hitting the ground. I do remember waking up, and I had a big old knot in the back of my head for about a week. And my sister's like, "We got to tell Mom and Dad." I'm like, "No, you can't tell Mom and Dad. I wasn't supposed to go do this." And so we didn't. Unfortunately, it wasn't. It wasn't terrible that I had a massive concussion and never told anyone about it.
Yeah.
But I completely forgot about that until she reminded me, like, probably 4 or 5 years ago.
Oh, that's funny. I'm wondering how many people in the audience have at least one, if not both parts of that story. I went to Chinatown against my parents' wishes and bought nunchaku. And the other part of, I banged myself in the back of the head so hard that I got a concussion or passed out. I don't have the Chinatown part, but I definitely have the when did I stop standing? Because I'm no longer standing. I definitely remember that part.
That's really a bad thing, generally speaking. I don't recommend it, but I gotta say, nunchaku, especially for older folks, we saw Bruce Lee, and we saw, it was like, this is the coolest thing ever. I need to get me some. The funny thing is, my son, who did some martial arts for all, he's one of my students growing up, and he actually picked up a pair. I'm not a particularly athletic person. He is. Like, he played college football. He's a certified strength and conditioning coach. I mean, he's like really good at this stuff. Cool. He picked a pair of nunchaku, never hurt himself. He's actually quite good with it, self-taught. And I'm like, wow.
That's unfair.
I don't know where you got that gene from, but it wasn't me.
Wow. I don't, what, was Bruce Lee an influence that got you involved?
I actually got involved before that, but Bruce Lee
Okay.
was an influence that made me excited about it and made me see it in a different
Mm,
way. And I don't know if you've seen Warrior, the
yeah.
show is based on what he wrote. I
Yeah.
just love that stuff.
It's a cool show.
And yeah, I mean, it's the practical effects, it's the you know martial arts spectacular sort of
Mm,
thing with a with a story that's interesting. And so I just always really loved that kind of stuff. But I was, I hate to admit this because it's probably one of those, Apple versus PC arguments. But I'm actually a little bit more of a Chuck Norris fan than a Bruce Lee fan in some ways.
mm. And how far do we go back, I guess, for
Well,
your
I started
first
in
Chuck Norris?
1970.
Right.
Started martial arts, and I think the first time I saw one of his movies was like I don't know 79 or something like that.
Yeah.
It was one of the first movies I ever saw, and I can't remember which one it was anymore. I think it might have been. Oh, I don't remember. It was just, I mean, the fight between him and Bruce Lee, I freaking
Mm,
love that. It's one of the best, pieces of film I mean, I still like that fight even today.
yeah.
Um, but there was something, so, I mean, Bruce Lee obviously never got to know, he did train in Seattle for a while. I know
Mm,
people who knew him, but obviously I've never met him. But Chuck Norris, a quick Chuck Norris story. So there was a guy named Tim who was one of the instructors in the school where I trained, and he ended up passing away.
mm.
And it was a kidney thing and whatnot.
So
But he
sorry.
did like the adult version of Make a Wish Foundation.
Mm,
And what he wanted to do was wanted to meet Chuck Norris. They flew him down there when Chuck was filming Lone Wolf McQuade or whatever it was,
okay.
the TV show version, not the movie. Um, no, Walker Texas Ranger. That's what it was.
Okay.
Same character, different, or at least more or less same character. The TV show version. There we go. So they flew Tim down there, and he meaning Chuck Norris spent the entire day with the guy. Gave him one of the jackets that the crew
All right.
used for the filming. I mean, it was like the best experience of his life. He came back and was telling us all about it. When he passed on, he
Great.
was buried in that jacket.
Mm,
And this is a guy. I mean, Chuck Norris was super busy at the time. That's when he's making movies and TV. He didn't have to do it. He really made the highlight of a guy's life whose life was cut way short,
yeah.
unfortunately. And that was like just such a cool thing to do. I've always just had a huge respect for him for things like that. The whistle kick, or not whistle kick, your whistle kick, kickstart for kids.
Yep. Yep.
Did I mention I've had 7 concussions? Um,
Well,
uh,
hey,
you know,
even as a stumble, I'll take you throwing Whistlekick's name in with even some rough fabricated association with Chuck Norris. But please continue.
there you go. Well, hey, I mean, in my mind, you guys are the same person now, but you got to work on that beard. Your beard's a little sparse, comparatively
It is.
speaking.
It is. I trimmed it the other day. If I had gotten the memo that this was a long beard episode, I would have kept it. I
Well, there
still
you
wouldn't
go.
have been where you are, but could have tried.
Actually, I have a corporate job, so I used to have a really long beard. Like I had I'm 51% Swedish, descended from a bunch of Vikings who tried to
Mm,
invade Constantinople, lost and settled in the steppes of Russia. Right, so I was like, I want a Viking beard. I want a big long beard I can braid and just see what it looks like. Well, I look like an
yeah.
idiot, um, but I used to actually have a beard long enough to do that.
Oh, that's cool.
And then I ended up with, I mean, I work at a corporate job and it's like it wasn't professional. So it didn't last. So my beard has been much longer than this, but
What are the
not now.
self-defense implications of a lengthy beard?
I just think that and obviously there is something to grab onto for other people,
Yeah.
but I think there's a kind of a fear factor thing in there. If you can rock a braided Viking beard, it's a good way to, how in actual, I'm actually taking this question seriously.
I
In
appreciate it.
actual self-defense, presence matters, right? And you
Right.
stave off a lot of violence with presence. So I know a guy who's, I don't know, 6'2", 6'3",
Mm,
shaved head, long braided beard, normal dude. Like he works in IT. He's not like a biker or something like that. And he dresses fairly professional for an IT person. But nobody ever messes with him because he's big, he's in great shape, and he's got a Viking beard, and just like there's something visceral about that. And I'm not even joking that, people look at you and go, no, I think I need to find somebody else to mess with.
I completely agree. And I think it's one of the elements of self-defense that is ignored. And it's that whole subject. We did an episode a couple months ago that I think we titled something like The Myth of Bad Self-Defense. And just this premise that if you learn even terrible self-defense and it makes you more confident, that it has made you less likely to end up in a situation. And so in a roundabout way is effective.
Yeah. I mean, obviously awareness is like your number one defense, right? If you find yourself fighting, you've actually screwed up your self-defense.
Yep.
It's all the things you do to avoid a fight, like awareness, avoidance, de-escalation. That's really self-defense. But presence is really underestimated. So I had an incident many, many years ago. I was in downtown Seattle. I had a bunch of boxes and I was sticking in the back of my car. And I was standing, there's a clock down there in front of a jewelry store. And it's a fairly famous landmark. I don't know if it's still there or not. I haven't been into Seattle downtown in years. But I'm standing there and as I'm putting the boxes and I'm looking right in the sun, I can't see anything. Mm-hmm. And, I had done a bunch of, it was like holiday shopping, a whole bunch of stuff. And I hear his voice and the guy was like right in my personal space. I mean, it actually kind of freaked me out because I hadn't seen him approach. And he goes, hey man, you know what time it is? And like, we're standing under a clock, right? And I had a watch on, but so I tossed the last box in the car. I kind of shifted back, straightened my spine, dropped my weight, didn't go into like a stance or anything. Just like I went from oblivious idiot to like somebody who could move. And I said, sorry, man, I don't have a watch. And he called, I don't remember what he said some derogative thing and wandered off. But as he wandered off, I could see a bulge in the back, where his right hand would be. I'm not sure if it was a gun or a knife or a baton or whatever it was. I mean, pretty sure it wasn't a cell phone is my point. Yeah. And I can almost guarantee this was, him testing to see if I'd be a good victim or not. Because if he'd said, you know what time it is, and I immediately looked at my watch, well, now I'm distracted, but I've also demonstrated I'm a compliant victim, right? Because I'm doing what he says, as opposed to, I didn't want to go full, get the hell away from me, freak out or something because it wasn't appropriate. But I could feel that the situation was not right. Like this is not a normal thing to do. Despite the fact that it was like really obviously not a normal thing to do. I wonder how many people would have noticed that. But instead, I just went from being oblivious to being paying attention, and he decided to go pick on somebody else. And there's a lot of things like that. I mean, that one was obvious, but how many times do we have things not happen we don't even know about?
The majority, right? It's so rare. One of the things I find most fascinating when we're talking about self-defense are these. I'm assuming it's studies. I've read about a single one where they present video of people walking across the street, walking down the street to felons. Who would you pick out? And they pick out the same people. And if they're not there in person with them, right, it's not an energetic thing. Yeah. They're picking up on subtle cues. And it's exactly what you're talking about here. It's your demeanor. It's the way you present yourself to the world. And that is something that can be disciplined and improved.
Oh, absolutely.
And you don't have to be the toughest person on the block. You just have to be not the easiest target.
Exactly. And there's a drill. I think Rory Miller is the one who taught me this. I can't remember where I got it from, but I've done it with students in the past. And that is where you go to like a food court in a mall, somewhere where you can look down across the mall. And there's a mall in South Center that's not too far from here. And it's got a nice layout for that. So you can kind of sit and look like you're doing something, but actually look over the railing and watch people without looking weird. And the trick is you watch people and go, if I was a bad guy, who would I rob? Mm-hmm. And it's the same concept as what you're talking about, but it gets you thinking about why, right? Because you get this, it's kind of like in The Gift of Fear, they talk about the danger signal we all have that most people ignore, right? Well, there's the reverse of that as well. You can tell who's a good victim or not a good victim, but you have to kind of train yourself to figure out why. And in doing that, you can go, oh, this person's texting on the phone and not paying attention. Oh, this person is walking submissively. Oh, this person is, lost in the cloud. Whatever it is, right? You can tell like who would be a good choice and who would not be a good choice. And it's actually pretty easy to figure that out. And as you start to be aware of that, you subconsciously start to make yourself not look like that. Just cool drill.
Yeah. How do you convey that sort of stuff to your students? Because I'm assuming you're not taking field trips to the mall.
No, we actually took field trips to the mall.
Really?
I mean, yeah. That's awesome. I mean, I described it originally. I was like, hey, here's the thing, and you should try it. And people are like, you want to come with us? That's like, sounds like fun. So I've done it only like 4 times, but it was a cool drill, and it's kind of fun. You're talking to a guy who like used to go to hockey games when I was in college to pick fights, right? I mean, I was never like afraid of this stuff until I like had kids and started to realize I had something to lose. And then I started to really shift my mindset from stay tough, be a good fighter, be, whatever, to let's not get involved. And so I've done all kinds of drills around, awareness and avoidance and de-escalation, including, various skill drill kind of things, scenario training, stuff like that. I did some modern combatives and close quarter stuff. So I've done a lot of non-traditional martial arts, in addition to the traditional, Asian style martial arts. And it just gives me a really broad kind of view of all that. The thing that I personally did that really perfected that is working stadium security. So I worked security for 26 years. I was supervisor most of that. And I had the kind of lower bowl and east end, so the student section and like the major visitor sections of Husky Stadium for a very, very long time. And that's where about 80% of the fights in the stadium took place. Mm-hmm. And I could always tell, not at the very beginning, but once I got good at it, I could always tell when something was going to happen, not always even by the person doing it, but by the reaction of the crowd around the person doing it. Mm-hmm. And so, I actually lost count at 300 violent altercations I was personally involved in. But of those, probably half of them, this is way less impressive than it sounds. Probably half of them, guy in uniform with radio yells at you to knock it off as you're starting to do something. And it freaks people out because they hadn't actually done it yet. Right. Mm-hmm. They started to, like, many times it's the amp up and you can see the escalado going, but they haven't thrown the punch, or they're just about throwing the punch. And because I'm seeing it, I'm able to move there. Now, there's a lot of them where, I deal with knives, guns, and fists and all kinds of bad stuff. But probably half the time it was just authority figure yelling at you in the right way at the right time. And it got people to stop doing stuff, and then I could talk them down.
Right. Well, what sort of stuff were you picking up on? I'm sure a lot of it was intangible, but for the elements that were things you could describe and advise people to watch out for.
Yeah, it's body language, right? But it's also, for example, so there's no weapons policy in every stadium, obviously. Mm-hmm. But at the University of Washington, where I worked, they lost a lawsuit with the ACLU. Mm-hmm. And so they were not allowed to do searches of people. Well, after 9/11, they changed that to, they got the lawyers out and they started doing inspections, which are not searches technically. But before that, it was like you couldn't do anything. So I would take an average of 6 knives off of people per game, sometimes more, sometimes a lot more, because, I would just get good at spotting them. We would occasionally find people with guns. More often that was the pro games. The Seahawks played there for a couple of years when their stadium was being rebuilt. So more often we find guns with the pros and knives with the college. But so it's always, looking for weapons. There was always people who you could see were there to cause trouble. And remember, I used to go to hockey games to cause trouble, right? So I kind of recognize it.
So you get it.
Yeah. So, part of it's like I don't even know how to describe it exactly, but when you see it, sort of thing, mm-hmm. right? So you're seeing, sort of the irrational exuberance, you're seeing the amping it up. In college stadiums, alcohol is not sold and technically not allowed, but of course there are people who drink and who sneak stuff in. And for years and years, I mean, it was generally a combination of testosterone and alcohol, right? But it manifests in different ways. And near the end of the time when I stopped working there when my son started playing football because I wanted to go to his games. And I'll tell you in a minute about, I had a really cool deal with that. But let me wrap this up by saying near the end of that time, probably 80% of the time I worked there, 26 years, men caused problems. At the very, very end, women started causing problems too. And I don't know what it was, something with society. I don't know the right cause of it, but the way they cause problems is very different. So for example, Mark McYoung taught me how to catch a punch. When a guy throws a punch at me and I catch it, generally that's the end of it right there, because they realize like, holy cow, wrong guy. I got to stop now. Right. When a lady throws a punch and you catch it, the next one comes. Like there's no, like, it doesn't even register. And so the worst felony arrest we ever did was actually a fight between three women. And it started in the stands. It moved into the first aid room. One of them almost got an officer's gun. It was just a disaster. Right. But, so the reason I bring that up is a couplefold. It's not, you can't like stereotype somebody, right? It's not young, fit guy with no shirt and, paint or whatever, right? I mean, it's not what somebody looks like. It's how they act. And when you get used to being around a crowd like that, you get a sense of what's normal and what's not normal. And when you see not normal, it's either the way the person's acting or the way the people around the person are reacting to the person. And so you're going to what's not normal. And I realize that's not a lot of detail for somebody like kind of do on their own, but it's literally as simple and as difficult as that. You're looking for what's not normal.
That makes sense. And it's like anything else we do, right? If you've spent a lot of time sparring, then, you're going to get good enough that you're going to pick up on things and you're going to bypass conscious thought and you're going to block that technique or get out of the way. And the first few times you do it really well, you're going to go, what did I just do? How did that? I didn't realize I was that good. That's pretty cool. But it's like anything else. I think the example most people are probably used to is when they're driving. Yeah. That you know what? That guy's going to go. That person's going to pull out. They're going to create a situation. I'm going to slow down. You don't even know why.
Right.
But you get it. You pick up on some subtle cue, whether it's, the wheels are still turning just a little bit, something.
Yeah. There's patterns. I mean, we're pattern recognition machines, right? That's the reason that humans have been able to evolve, right? Because you get that, eat this thing and, gee, what happened to Fred? I better not do that again. Right. And then you recognize the pattern of, that striped, chartreuse berry with the polka dots. Don't eat that or whatever. I mean, that's not real, but, but the point is that that we get patterns and we recognize patterns. We also have to be careful we don't get tricked by them. Right. So, when you get used to it, I've seen like I was at a seminar and this guy was talking about how you always need to see people's hands and it's going just really hardcore on it. And I finally said, I raised my hand and he's like, yeah. And I go, doesn't that mean that you need to attack your waiter when they bring you your silverware? And he's like, well, no, that's not what I meant. I said, yeah, but that's what you said, right? You said and so you got to be careful about taking the broad generalizations and applying it, just like you have to be careful about going into the weeds and only looking at the weeds. It's a holistic picture. And so, just because you can't see somebody's hands or because they got a knife in them or whatever. I mean, I've had many, many waiters come to me and hand me a steak knife, right? They're not attacking me, but they did have a knife in their hand.
None of them
and they were moving toward me
with that knife.
No, not a single one, shockingly enough.
Excellent.
I have had someone pour like hot coffee on me by accident, but that's the worst incident I've had in a restaurant was I had coffee poured on me.
And yet none of us train coffee defense.
That is true. And actually, without joking aside, I actually have used a ridiculously overpriced Starbucks venti extra hot Americano to defend myself at one point, and you cannot block that.
No. No, how did that trend? Is that a story you're willing to share? That's a
Sure. It
yeah.
was so another set. I seem to have a lot of downtown Seattle stories for some reason. Walk out of Starbucks, the one, the actually original one in Pike Place Market,
Oh, okay.
which is a pretty cool location. But walk out of there. I just got my coffee. It's double cupped and has a sleeve on it because it's like flaming hot, right? And it was a fairly cold day, so I wanted to last. And walk out, start to go, just to wherever. I don't even remember what I was doing. I was probably going to go see Pike Place Market or something. And guys like, give me your wallet. And he had his hand, like he didn't have a weapon out, but his hand like under his jacket. And I said, no. And I threw my coffee in his face and ran. It wasn't very exciting, but he didn't go after me. And he made lots of really bad noises. So
yeah, it's, I like situations like that. Like isn't the right word. I appreciate situations like that because what I hear is a couple things. One, threat assessment, erring on the side of self-preservation, not, well, hold on, let me talk you down, right?
well, it was kind of a screw up on my part because I wasn't paying enough attention. I mean, he was in position before I knew he was there. So it was a recovery from my not using good situational awareness.
Sure.
But once he said something, then you're right. I did go into that mode, but it actually isn't one of the things I'm proud of because I didn't really do it right.
But I look at situational awareness not as a binary state, not either you have it or you don't, but it's a spectrum, right? And
Sure.
It's like any other skill, it's going to improve. There's always going to be someone that's going to be able to sneak up on you.
Well, yes and no. So there's something Mark McYoung calls a reverse werewolf, right? So you get predators, and at a long enough distance, you can tell they're predators. As they get closer, they become normal because they're trying to hide it. And then when they are right next to you, they repredatorize again. Not that that's a word, but you get the point, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're paying attention farther away, it's obvious who the bad guys are. It's when it's cold, you're blowing on your coffee, you're not really paying attention, and you walk into them, that you're not in the far range where you could see it coming. You're not quite in the near range where it's too late, but you missed the transition. And so I missed the transition. And this is back in the pre-cell phone days, so I didn't have an excuse like I was listening to music with earbuds or texting or something like that. I just literally wasn't paying attention. Also, I will say in my own defense, it was like 10 a.m. I mean, it was not. We're taught that stuff happens like late at night in certain areas or whatever. It's not always true. And I'm not a particularly big guy, and I don't really ward things off by like size necessarily.
You didn't have your Viking beard?
No, actually back then I only had a mustache even. Yeah. I mean, I didn't even have a beard. I'll blame that on the whole thing. Yeah. But long time ago. But the way that you generally get out of stuff is literally by paying attention, but you have to do it far enough away. So like your driving example, right? If you're looking too close to you won't see stuff coming in time to react. You have to be looking farther out and kind of do the horizon check. And that's why heads up displays are so valuable in cars nowadays, that sort of thing. Same concept, just have to be walking. But I will say that you cannot block a hot cup of coffee.
No.
I've actually used that a couple of times. And it's really expensive, but it does work really, really well.
Well, it's less expensive than nearly anything else you would want to have on you.
Well, that's
a tool.
True. And it's legal everywhere.
It is. It is. I'm a big fan of a belt, but it takes a lot longer to deploy a belt than the coffee in your hand. And, if we look at the more modern philosophies behind real world combatives.
Yeah.
Right. Your hand's already there. Right. You're not carrying your coffee with your hand in your pocket. It's already out.
Exactly.
And, one could make the argument that you should have a hot cup of coffee at any given time if you're in a dangerous area because
or
a
water
weapon, or maybe it's an empty cup. Maybe it's fake.
Well, yeah. Or, I mean, like, I don't know if you can see this, but that would hurt a lot.
I'm guessing that's like a half-gallon water jug.
It is a half-gallon metal water jug. Yeah.
Yeah.
I get stuck in meetings for like hours at a time sometimes. So I use it for drinking, but I mean, I wouldn't want to get hit by that.
No. What's the best weapon? The one you have available.
Exactly. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned a story, something that, as you transitioned out of security, something about when your son was playing.
Yeah, and I totally forgot what it was I was going to talk about, but I will say, I remember now.
Okay.
So, football was basically, or same security is basically getting paid to watch football until somebody did something stupid, right? And then I had to deal with it. So either getting really, really overpaid or really, really underpaid. Well, after my son started playing football, I actually got my reporter's credentials, and I got paid to watch his football games and report on them, which again was getting paid to watch football, but much safer. So, that's sort of
better way to do it.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, being a sideline reporter is really fun. And I did it for high school, college. I did it mostly for his teams and his games, but I also got paid to go see some other games and whatnot. And college, if you know the game really, really well. So he didn't play at a D1 school, but where he did play, they had a bunch of, professional reporters, right? I knew football so much better than them that I actually got better shots than most of them because I knew where the plays were going and stuff. So, talk about pattern, and understanding patterns and all that, because I knew the game well. And it's the same kind of thing, with the situational awareness and all that, right? I was able to I had some like Sports Illustrated quality type shots. I mean, I had a $12,000 camera too that I got to write off more of my taxes. But I mean, well, that's the camera, the lens, the whole package, not the camera itself. But my point is that I get paid enough to write off a $12,000 camera to watch my son's football games and report on them. So it was
it's a pretty good deal.
Yeah.
What I'm imagining that there were things you pulled from watching football back into your training.
It's kind of funny because I remember reading a story. Some famous martial artist whose name I can't remember worked for the 49ers for a while with their linemen and was teaching them hand drills and stuff. And Kris Wilder, who I frequently write with and was my karate instructor before he had to move, did the same thing for some other teams, high school teams primarily. And so usually you're seeing it from the perspective of football players are learning from martial artists how to do certain things better. But I actually learned a few things. So, like Sanshin spine, if you do karate, there's the way that you're adjusting your lower spine so that you're connecting your body more effectively. Well, football players do the same thing when they're about to, you see like good receivers or corners. They do that so they don't have to pivot a little bit on their kind of straighten up before they move. They're already sort of in that Sanshin spine when they're ready to start the beginning of the play. And so I was noticing things like that. They're like, oh, that's interesting. There's an interesting corollary here, right? And he saw how like linemen, how you get low and how you can unbalance people. Like, oh, that's all like sumo. And so I'm seeing like little parts and pieces of these things that it's not like big macro stuff, but micro stuff I was seeing because I'd go hang out at practices and get a chance to take pictures and stuff like that. And, pre-game and then during the games. And then I have to rush home and write articles after. And I was just surrounded enough that I would see these things that people would do are really good. Well, working at the college stadium, I saw a lot of people ended up with long NFL careers, and some of whom were pretty amazing. And it helped me see in some ways. So some of them, like Napoleon Kaufman, when he was in college, I was actually slightly bigger than him because I had a conversation with him. I was sitting along the sideline going, man, this guy's really small. Like this guy's my size. One of the fastest people I've seen in my entire life. And he played for the Raiders for like 6 or 8 years or something. He's a running back. Seemed like a really cool dude. It's not like I'm friends with him or anything, but I talked to him a couple times. Yeah. But what I noticed with him was just this insane fast twitch muscle. The guy was just like so unbelievably fast and so smooth in the way he moved. And I was thinking kind of at the time, like, man, I will never be like that because I'm just I'm not a very athletic person. Yeah. And then I would see people later on, years after that in the dojo who had that same fluidity And what I realized is part of it was actually the natural thing, but part of it's training. Because I found, like there's a older guy, Okinawan guy, who's just ungodly good, and just he's probably 60s. I don't even know. And he was just demonstrating. So just an example of what I mean by that is he was demonstrating something on me, and he said, my great front kick, right? Okay, so I throw a kick, and he's demonstrating the techniques, like no power at all. This is like 2%. He shifts and he blocks my kick with his hand or his arm. I had a bruise for a month. It was just this deep black, purple, green, nasty, like, he might have maybe done a microfracture or something. I never had it checked, but I mean, like I was limping around for a month and he wasn't even trying to do anything. He was just demonstrating the movement. That was no technique at all, right? But it was all technique, if that makes sense, right? Because placement. Even when he's putting no power into it, his technique was flawless. And when I saw this guy move, man, he would move in, if you look at him and you go, old Okinawan dude, you see him move, you go, holy cow, like, how do you do that? Yeah. But you can tell it's not, he didn't have the fast twitch muscle. He wasn't in awesome shape or anything. He wasn't the 20-something-year-old pro athlete, right? He was somebody who'd been doing this his entire life and got it down flawlessly and had no unnecessary movement in his technique, right? Everything he did was exactly precise and exactly correct. And I found out later he learned karate from his dad growing up, and like the first many years, I think it was like 5 years or something, but I may have misremembered that. All he did was stances, like nothing else. But every day for hours and hours. So it's kind of the amateurs train until they get it right. Professionals train until they can't get it wrong, right? He was on that track.
Mm-hmm. Well, you've spent plenty of time teaching, right? You have a school or have had a school?
No, I taught in a school. Okay. Unfortunately, the whole, virus lockdown thing put the school out of business. So I actually haven't. Yeah. I've not been in a dojo since then because there isn't one. But I did teach in Westdale Karate Academy, which was run by Kris Wilder, who's a Hall of Fame member. You probably know him.
Yeah. Yep.
And I'm nowhere near as good as him, by the way, just for the record.
What would he say about that? I bet.
I think he'd agree. I know stuff that, I know stuff that he doesn't, right? Because he's been primarily focused on karate, and I do knives and guns and swords and other stuff that he's never really done.
Cups of coffee.
But I'm one of those kind of a mutt, right? I've done a whole bunch of big smattering of traditional martial arts, modern stuff, medieval recreation stuff, all kinds of weird things. So if I'd focus on any one thing, I'd be like really, really good at it. I mean, I've been doing martial arts for 48 years, right? But I'm not awesome. I'm just adequate at a whole bunch of things.
What is it that keeps you looking at other things? You're speaking, and let me preface that with,
sure.
You've spoken very, very positively about two different people now who were, head down, kind of tunnel vision in pursuing an art.
Yeah. So it's, I'm like all about interesting and meaningful experiences, right? So, if I'm at the fork of a road and I've got to choose two paths, I'll try to pick the one that's more interesting, lead to something more interesting happening. Not in the ancient Chinese curse sort of interesting definition, but I like experiences, right? So, part of it was, so I started in judo, and when I went to college, the judo instructor was not available anymore. So I did a little bit of karate. That instructor was horrible. So I ended up doing kendo and some sword fighting, things like that. I was ended up in a bar fight, and one of my friends, who was a very interesting character, afterwards said, this whole empty hand stuff, like in a real fight, that's dumb. Like, you're not an ape, use a tool kind of concept. That quote actually didn't come from him, but it was the same concept. So I'm like, oh, okay. So I ended up shooting competitively for 4.5 years, doing all kinds of, combatives type stuff. I mean, I just, you know, it just sort of things morphed and changed. The one I spent the longest amount of time with was Okinawa Goju-Ryu. But that was because of the instructor, right? So Kris was such an awesome instructor, and I really, really learned from the experience. So like my judo instructor was actually his, not at the same time, but he was the highest ranking black belt in the United States at the time. Brought, you know, judo largely to America in some ways. You know, just like an amazing dude. He'd, you know, pack his kids up in this big 1970s Ford LT station wagon, drive us up to Canada where we go compete tournaments on weekends and stuff, right? There was no border security back then. And, you know, not with no parents, no permission slips, right? So, I mean, great dude in a lot of ways, but he taught Japanese style. He didn't explain anything. And so I did judo for like four and a half years, something like that. It was still a green belt, just not very good. And I went to a week-long, like a camp that was taught by the Canadian Olympic judo coach. And I learned more in that 1 week than I did in those 4.5 years, right? Because he explained how stuff works. So all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I need to find a good instructor. It doesn't really matter so much about what I do. And so part of my bouncing around so much, other than just like, oh, I'd like to be able to hit, you know, to hit a target with a gun. That sounds like fun, you know. Oh, now let's try this other kind of gun, or let's try this. I love swords; are really cool. I actually made swords and knives in addition to learning how to use them. So I mean, I got a lot of experiences that were just interesting, right? But ultimately, the thing I resonated with the most and stayed with the longest was the good instructor, which happened to be Kris, because he could teach and reach my learning style much better. So I learned, you know, I think more effectively from him than anybody else I learned stuff from, including the combatives folks, you know, some of the modern stuff, which is supposed to have modern teaching methods. You know, it's all about the individual and how well they can connect with you, kind of sort of thing. That makes sense.
How did you connect with Kris? How'd you find him?
It's kind of funny. So I was doing this medieval recreation fighting stuff, like, you know, SCA, Rome Show, things like that, if you've heard of that. And you couldn't really do that on your own, right? So you're putting on real armor, using rattan, so solid weapons, like you know, like somebody, think about kind of like kendo with, you know, more solid weapons and more realistic, or, you know, heavier armor. And it was hard to do that on a regular basis because, you know, it was so much time consuming effort. And like, for example, I had a suit of white harness plate armor, it's a Maximilian fluted plate, you know, mass heavy stuff, gorgeous, absolutely real. Right. But every time I used it, it wasn't stainless steel because, you know, it was real. So I had to polish it afterwards. So, you know, you might work out for an hour and a half, you get all sweaty and stuff. You have to go put all the armor away, polish it, clean it, whatever, you know. So I'm thinking, I need something else, right? I'm like, I love doing this stuff, but I need something to stay in shape. It's gonna be fun, whatever. I walked into a YMCA. I was actually going to go lift weights, and I saw this karate class, and I'm like, oh, that looks kind of cool. And so I kind of hang out and like watch a little bit. And he goes, are you interested in karate? I'm like, oh, well, you can have a free lesson. And, you know, 20 something years afterwards, I'm still there. Right now, he moved from the YMCA to got his own place, you know, moved a couple of times, and I stayed with it. Well, now he's in, you know, it's probably a 2.5 hour drive away. So that doesn't work anymore. But it was really the quality of the instruction. And so, you know, if I was giving advice to somebody who's interested in martial arts, you know, it doesn't really matter what you take, as long as it meets your need, whatever the reason is for doing it. You know, is it self-defense? Is it, you know, self-actualization? Is it getting in shape? Whatever it is you're trying to do, right? As long as it meets that, find the best instructor you can get, somebody that works for you, and stick with that, right? So even though I've done all this wild, eclectic, you know, stuff, if, you know, I had have found the right instructor from day one, I probably would have stuck with that day one through, you know, most of it, and occasionally dabbled in other things, but more, you know, like go to a seminar or take a class or whatever, not like completely changing what I did, because some of these things are incompatible, right? You know, I'm fairly well rounded, but there's sort of mindset and give you an example. So with the medieval stuff, right? It's almost impossible to protect your feet against a solid rattan object to where if you get hit, you won't break your foot, and then you're probably never going to walk again, right? Even with surgery, right? So it's illegal to hit below the knee, even though you tend to wear armor below the knee. It's illegal for safety because people miss, right? So in Kabuto, when I was studying Kabuto, we used a bow staff. Bow staff is done many, many ways very similar to a medieval spear. Mm-hmm. There just doesn't happen to have a point on one end, but they're very similar in terms of technique. So I was in a tournament with the medieval stuff, and I did this beautiful movement. The guy had a sword and shield, and I had a boar spear, and I kind of knocked him offline a little bit and pivoted, and I was just about to do this, think of almost like a downward pool cue sort of thing, right into his ankle, which would have shattered his ankle, and he probably never would have walked again, right? And I caught myself right before it connected and froze. And the guy, like, he looks down, he looks at me, I look down, I look at him, and we're like, oh shit. And I probably should, for context, I was the head marshal, which means I was the guy in charge of safety of the whole organization, right? So one of the other marshals looks over at me and goes, that's not a target. I'm like, yeah, I get it. I had to quit doing that because Kabuto, it is a common target. Like aiming at somebody's foot is a great way to be able to defend yourself, right? Because you pop them in the foot and you can run away. And remember, Kabuto was based, was created by Okinawans who were had been invaded by the Japanese, who had arms and armor, but the Okinawans did not. So what's a great target for that? The foot or the ankle, right? I couldn't reconcile my brain going from the sport where you have to hit above the knee to the combative thing, Kabuto, where the foot's a really common target, right? I just couldn't do it. And so, I could do it when I was thinking, right? But then it would move too slowly. When I started to just react and just, get into the moment, which is what you have to do if you're going to win a tournament at a high level. My brain couldn't make the switch. Yeah. And so I had to stop doing it, because of that. So some people may not have that problem, but for me, there were two completely incompatible things. Even though the motions were almost identical, even though the weapons were almost identical, they were so incompatible because of what they were designed for. I couldn't do both. And there's other arts that, are incompatible as well. Just the strategy and the tactics just don't work. But, that's kind of a visceral example that maybe makes sense.
That makes sense. Yeah. I want to switch gears a little bit because it's such a big aspect of your relationship to the martial arts, and that's your time as an author.
Oh yeah.
How many books have you written? It's more than a couple.
Well, I've published 27,
okay.
About 70% through the 28th one. I got started as an author because of martial arts. Actually, you may find this amusing. So, I get my EQ, my high level brown belt, and Kris says, okay, you're going to test for black belt in a year, and I want you to write a thesis and bring it to the test. Like, oh, wow. Okay. Year thesis. So I show up at the test, and I've got this, big, it was a 140-page document, and I hand it to him, and he's like, Kane, what the hell is this? The thesis you asked for? No, I meant like a research paper, like, 5 or 10 pages. I'm like, oh God, I'm an idiot. So a month later or so, after he gets done reading, is this is fantastic. You got to get this published. I'm like, how do I do that? I don't know. Figure it out. Sensei says, figure it out. So I did. So then, a couple years later, first book comes out. It's been out for about 6 months. Publisher calls me up and goes, so what's your next book going to be? I'm like, next book? I didn't even plan to write a first book. And so I actually had all these notes that I'd taken, throughout the time. And I said, I got this idea, but I'm not sure I feel comfortable doing it myself because I'm just a showdown. So I went to Kris and said, hey, most people think kata is dancing around in your underwear. You've shown that it's not. I'd like to write a book on that. And so we collaborated, and that's where the Way of Kata came from, which was a massive bestseller. The average book sells 250 copies lifetime. A bestseller is anything over 5,000. That one, I don't know how it's doing today, but in the first couple of years, it sold 20,000 copies.
Cool.
So, that was kind of the impetus. That's why most of my books are co-written with Kris, because we tend to work really, really well together. And we're both, we take unlike most martial artists, we actually take the ego out of it, and it's all about having good quality work. And so it makes it like really, really nice. But it all, it all started from martial arts. Most of my books are martial arts related, martial arts fans society, stuff like that. There are a few business ones because like I'm actually in a Hall of Fame, but it's for the like real job, not for martial arts. So, I do a little bit of stuff like that. So, if you ever need trouble sleeping, I've written a book on contract law, but most of the stuff that I do is about martial arts.
What's the new book you're working on?
That one's a fiction book.
Is this your first fiction title?
Third. But okay. Most of my stuff's nonfiction, but it is martial arts fiction. So I think it's going to be. I don't want to talk too much about it yet to give anything away, but it's if you like Karate Kid, Cobra Kai, that sort of thing. It's sort of like that with a little better characterization in my view, and a little bit more of a kind of life lesson that comes through it without being preachy. So there'll be hopefully that's going to come out somewhere around November.
Oh, cool.
So
all right, so it's good.
Yeah, but it's it's kind of funny. I have been really fortunate to stumble into writing because it's allowed me to meet people around the world. Like nobody would know who I was if I didn't write books, right? Except for the local dojo or something. And, I've got friends in almost every continent. I've been in, hundreds of interviews, including things like, Forbes and big time, most of these are work related, but big time, I've been on Fox Morning News. I've been, I've done all kinds of stuff that's it did an hour on the Jim Bohannon show, which is a nationally syndicated radio talk show. Things like that. Right. So all that's from the books. And I've also sold, well over 100,000 copies. I don't even know exactly. I'll tell you, it is not lucrative. It's not even.
No. I mean, anybody who thinks writing books is a good career move doesn't either cannot do math or doesn't value their own time.
Correct. Yeah. I had one book. So Kris and I actually created our own publishing company. It's an actual C Corp, real company. But before we did that, the reason we did it was because one of the publishers, we made that publisher, I think it was about $6.8 million and got 80,000 that we split between the two of us out of it. Now, if you do the math there, that is not the 15% royalties that you would expect, because 15% of 6.8 million is a much bigger number. But you know how Hollywood accounting works? It's the same thing in the book industry.
Yep. Every expense comes out of that 15%.
Yeah. And like, I've had contracts with, major publishing houses, the kind where you get an advance that's like real money, that never sold out of the advance because they didn't listen. I've had niche publishers that did really, really well, but the structure of the deal was all for them. So it just finally got tired of it and went, we can do better. And we have. I mean, Musashi's Dakota, which is one of our best sellers, was the number one on Amazon for 36 weeks in a row, dropped for about 3 or 4 weeks, and then went back up to number one again for 3. So, I mean,
cool.
I actually know how to do this.
It is,
but people like what we do, which is the only reason I still do it. I mean, if something didn't sell, like you said, your time. I mean, my first couple of years of writing, I was probably making 1/100th of a cent per hour or something. Because you not only have to write it, you have to promote it. There's like so much stuff you have to do. There's a couple million new titles published every year, right? And then there's a few 100,000 are published by the big publishing houses. You have to compete to break out all that noise. That's a lot of stuff. And the 300 or 1,000 that come from the big houses, they get all the marketing dollars. But even they get lost in the noise, right? There's only, I read a study, last year actually, because I did put together a keynote on how to get published. And so I had to do research, and 81% of people believe they got a book in them. Less than just about 1.8% actually get published. And of those that get published, only 6% actually make a living from it, meaning they make over $100,000.
Wow.
And even with the pandemic and all that sort of stuff, like when you think people will be reading, revenues declined 38% during the pandemic. And new titles only account for 32% of retail book sales. So all those new books that come out there, most people don't buy them. They're buying stuff that's tried and true, that is somehow broken out of the noise, right? It's just, the industry is bizarre.
Do you see that in I assume you do analysis on your titles.
Oh yeah.
Is it still the way of kata that?
No, they shifted around. And part of that's because the way of kata came through a different publisher, and they don't promote it anymore. So a lot of these publishers, what they do is they'll promote the book for the first year or so. And so you see this big spike, and then it kind of tails off, and then they don't do the promotion after that. And we don't promote books from publishers where the royalties are crap. Right. So, it's on my author page, but I don't do any, digital marketing, don't do anything active about those, only the stuff that are through Stickman Publications, because that's where I actually get real royalties. And so, you see that, some of those still pop up. You'll still see sales occasionally, but it's not like we used to be selling, I think when that first came out, we were selling like 30, 40 books a day, something like that. It's now like, maybe that many in a month. I don't really track that as carefully. I get royalty reports and kind of go, well, that check sucks, and then put it in a drawer, So that's kind of one of those, I'm not paying as much attention to it, but I think that if anybody is an aspiring writer, I think the takeaway from that is you have to keep yourself, you have to find ways to break out of the noise. And even if you do our Penguin contract, one of the things they had Kris on the Howard Stern show. We did 0 for sales, right? Because it's the wrong audience.
Right.
But he had to go do it. I would have gone too, but I had less flexibility to do the travel than he did. So ended up, we're only able to make it work with just him. But so, the big publishers, they'll put you on these shows. That's how I got, on live television as well. But what happens is, if they don't pick correctly, because they go through their Rolodex of people they know, or virtual, there's no Rolodex anymore, but virtual Rolodex of people they know, and they work with these producers, and they'll get you on these shows, right? But if the show's audience isn't the right set of folks who buy your book, they don't really pay any attention to that. And so most sales are coming from word of mouth, book reviews, especially Amazon reviews, podcasts, kind of guerrilla marketing, so to speak, right? And then well done digital marketing, where you're actually targeting ads at certain people through Facebook or Google or whatever platform your audience happens to be in. And I mentioned Facebook, and like most people go, ugh, right? But our audience happens to be older folks. Mm-hmm. And so, I actually have, let me see if I can find it real quick while we're talking. 78.2% of our readers are male, 21.8% female, predominantly between the ages 25 and 54. So, there's actually, you can go through and really look at the demographics, and then identify how do you make the channel work based on who reads your stuff. And so I actually do Facebook ads from time to time, because it's an older audience who actually uses it, even though I don't even have a Facebook account personally. So,
yeah, it's fascinating how all this stuff works. We've done some stuff with books, and been well received, but I even better than I do, having written so many more. It's a slog, and if you go into it to make money, it's probably not a use of time that you will be thankful for. You're likely to regret it. I know a lot of people who, I had to get this book out. I had to get it out of my head. And that's really the extent. It was
But
in
if
there.
it's a passion, that's cool.
Sure.
I just don't think you're going to make a ton of money on it. So, traditional publishing, right? The publisher owns the royalties. They invest in the work, which means, you get a lot less royalty.
Mm-hmm.
It's a much more prestigious ISBN, but they'll typically make you hire an agent, right? So now instead of just splitting, like most of my stuff's co-written. So instead of just splitting between two authors, is now our agent gets a cut. And so you start diluting that pool, right? They facilitate marketing, but they don't really do the marketing. So traditional publishing, if you're famous, you have a much better odds of success. You still have to do stuff, but it really helps to be famous. For self-publishing or that kind of thing, or hybrid, you own the royalties. But that also means you have to do all the investments to make it, professional. So, like a Penguin or somebody, they're going to provide, copywriters, editors, proofreaders, like all this stuff, right? You get the whole infrastructure to make sure it's good. You got to do all that stuff yourself. You also don't get an advance, right? You only make money once you generate royalties. Mm-hmm. But if you're passionate enough, you have a likelihood of being successful. Right. So one of them is kind of about fame and letting the system work. And the other one's kind of about your passion and drive and energy, realizing that, the chances of you making a lot of money are pretty small. But you can, if you luck out. Another thing that's really interesting is for martial artists, nonfiction actually generally pays better than fiction because you can branch out. So let's say you go and you teach a seminar, right? You got some of your books for sale. Maybe you've got some other merchandise that you have. Maybe it draws people into your studio. Maybe it, there's offshoots of nonfiction that's not just the book. Right. And so, for example, I wrote a book co-wrote a book on contract law. Well, I helped leverage that to get a higher paying job. Mm-hmm. So there's an indirect path as well. Like, look, I'm in the Hall of Fame. I'm a world's leading expert on this thing. And by the way, I wrote this stuff, right? So, in fact, when I was introduced for one of these things, and he literally wrote the book on this. I'm like, well, a book, not the book, but yeah, I did. So, the point is that if you're just doing it as as kind of I got to get this out of my head and it's really exciting, you're probably going to sell under 250 books. Mm-hmm. And you're going to have, something kind of a cool memento. Just be aware of that. It's not lucrative. But if you do something that people actually want to buy and that adds value and you market it right, then you can actually make some money and it gets broader, right? So if it's, Lawrence, my life in martial arts, it's like everyone's going to fall asleep. Nobody cares, right? But if it's something that's, like some of our bestsellers, Little Black Book of Violence, Dude, the World's Going to Punch You in the Face, Masashi's Dakota, Martial Arts in Your Life. I mean, things that actually provide value for folks, those can sell pretty well. Some of the, like we did Three Fires of Sanchin, which is largely Kris with me editing, and like super deep on how does Sanchin work actually at the physiological level. And, phenomenal book, extremely good feedback. It's a niche of a niche audience, right? You have to be a traditional Japanese or Okinawan martial arts practitioner who does Sanchin, who actually cares about that stuff, right? So it's not aimed at a big audience, but it was like something he really, really wanted to do. Yeah. And it furthered the field. Like, I mean, he like actually wired himself up with things and,
that's cool.
Did study. I mean, it's fascinating, but only for a really small group of people, right? Whereas like Dakota, that's Musashi. I'm sure everybody's heard the Book of Five Rings. Mm-hmm. Well, that's his 21 principles that he wrote right before he died, right? You can get that for free. You don't need to buy the book. But if you want to know what the principles mean and how they might apply to you, what we did is we took 5 different perspectives of each one and did commentary around each one of those 21 principles. And there's also a workbook if you want to make it your own and take those principles and actually apply them into your life. It's the Musashi Field Manual, right? So that was designed so people can actually do something with it, right? Cool. martial arts in your life is the world's most comprehensive and probably only study on what makes martial artists tick and how are they different than like everyday folks, and how can you be more successful as a martial artist. So, a bunch of things like that we've done.
Right on. If people want to check out your books, where do they go? What's the easiest place?
Probably Amazon. Amazon author page is the easiest. You can just Google me. By the way, I'm Lawrence Kane, the author, not the Zodiac killer suspect. He has the same name as I do. But
I appreciate that clarification.
Yeah, I figured you'd like that. If you go on Amazon and just type Lawrence A. Kane, you can find my author page pretty easily, or even just a normal Google search. But we've got all kinds of stuff out there. Most of the things I do are co-written. Mm-hmm. So you could also search on Kris or Rory Miller and I wrote a book together. Several other things like that. So
cool. Right on. Well, we're going to wrap here, but I want to pass the ball back to you for our close. I always invite the guest. How do you want to wrap this up? You're talking to a whole bunch of martial artists. We've talked about a whole bunch of martial arts things. What words do you want to leave them with? Sure.
So, I have found martial arts to be really transformational in my life. It's something that, I started doing it as a kid because kind of my folks sort of made me. What I found is it really helped me to be a better person and to be more resilient in tough things. I mean, as an example, I negotiate multi-billion-dollar contracts for a living. I've been in meetings where everybody's freaking out and I'm thinking, well, nobody's trying to stab, punch, or shoot me. What do I care? Right. And I have a level of calm that makes all the people around me calm and makes me a better negotiator. I've had some, pretty significant impact. I mean, honestly, I probably wouldn't be alive today if I hadn't studied martial arts, because I got into a couple of really dumb situations that I had to get myself out of because I screwed up my self-defense and felt myself fighting. But even if that hadn't happened, I found that the aspects of understanding your body, understanding your mind, fitness, nutrition, all the things that go with it has really, really been transformational. And it's something that I absolutely don't regret in the slightest. Even my just sort of, doing the dog's breakfast of different things and dabbling here and there. I just found enjoyment out of it. I've never really aspired to be, the world's best karate or something anyway. I just want to learn stuff. And so it's been a really cool journey. I've learned a ton. I've met a ton of people all around the world because of it. And, kind of my point is that martial arts oftentimes is transformational ways we don't think about when we get started. The journey kind of changes over time, right? When I was a kid, I liked to compete and win trophies and stuff. I'm in a very different phase now. But it's something that stuck with me and probably will stick with me for my entire life because, it's just become a part of who I am. And one of the really cool things is when I go out and I speak at conferences, I do keynotes, stuff like that all the time. So I talk to people in business and I'm usually dressed, wearing a suit or whatever. Most people think I'm in my 40s and they go, man, you've accomplished so much. Right. I look way younger than my actual age because I do all the exercise for martial arts. So there's that too. Right. So, other than the gray hair, I think most people have no clue how old I actually am. So, there's an advantage in doing this stuff. And I think it's worth the journey. And so, find a good instructor, do something you enjoy, stick with it. I hope you enjoyed that episode. I had a great time talking to Lawrence. Knew that I would. And I'm glad that I was right. Thanks for coming on. I appreciate your time. Audience, you know what to do. Share this episode. Tell people about whistlekick. Go check out Lawrence's books and all the other things that he's got going on. Support this community that we've built. You are part of it. Help it grow. Whether that's through joining the family Patreon or reaching out for school consulting, any number of things. You can follow us on social media. We're at whistlekick, and my email address, jeremy@whistlekick.com.
I appreciate you all, and I hope to hear you. No, I hope to see you. I hope to know that you're back soon at some point as we connect, educate, and entertain. Until next time, train hard, smile, and have a great day.